I think what happens in some of this venting is that people will start with the assumption, like, hey, why are you upset? What's going on?
It's because your emotions are trying to help you to navigate the world. Emotions, trying to get you to do something, to address something.
Yeah, your subconscious is what's causing all of these emotions. And your subconscious is like, you
feel a certain way. And that's true that you felt a certain way if you felt it. But then in terms of then drawing causality of, it's because of this, that's the part where it's dangerous to say with certainty, I know this. Because it can assert that in your own mind, especially because oftentimes people around you will just validate that. So I was talking to a family friend one day, and we were talking, I think somehow the topic of independence came up, and she was asking, like, do you feel like being independent is part of your identity? And I answered her in like 3 different ways, kind of like, here's this thing about identity, and here's this thing about it, and she kept being like, Sume, do you ever just vent your emotions? And because it just seemed like, I guess she was kind of getting annoyed with how precise I was trying to be about definitions in order to answer the question.
Logical and sort of like third person.
Yeah. And I was like, no. And it was just kind of like a thing where I was kind of like seeing where she was getting at with the question and why I kept answering her in different ways. I was not getting to what she was really asking about. And it was just kind of funny because I know a lot of people, see, I guess there's kind of like different conceptions around venting and whether or not it's a good or bad thing. And there can be kind of a negative connotation to venting.
Well, I mean, I personally, like, I definitely feel the need to vent sometimes, specifically to you. Oh my god, this one person, blah, 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 they did this thing, and it's just like,
Yeah.
And I'll feel the need to do that. But when I think about it, I'm like, venting's not very helpful. Because, like, when I think about, like, when I'm venting, I'm so emotionally charged that I'm not going to really see things very logically.
Well, I think it kind of just depends on the goal, because I think that a lot of it is just like, to vent, I just need to get my emotions out, right? And then they'll be out, and then somehow that's going to do something, right? And then it's like, but
it feels very satisfying.
Right. I can see why.
Extremely satisfying.
Yeah. And I think that part of it is that it kind of comes down to why do we have these negative emotions in the first place, and how, your emotions are trying to help you to navigate the world and to kind of give you, it's like the emotion is like emotions, trying to get you to do something, to address something.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that a lot of it is, people talk about how, like, for machine learning models, basically, it's like if something happens that's not unexpected, or if the model's trying to minimize the error between whatever it's trying to predict and whatever might happen.
Yeah.
Right. And humans are trying to do the same thing, right? We want to minimize the disconnect between whatever we think is going to happen and then whatever happens.
Yeah.
Right. Because we want to have, you want to have whatever you predict to happen to be like roughly the same. Otherwise, then you're going to be blindsided by something you didn't expect.
Yeah, well, that makes sense. You want your mind model to be able to predict things, and when things happen that you didn't predict, then that's jarring, and you want to grow your model.
Yeah.
And so, but the difference with models and our brains is that with our brains, we're actually feeling the emotions,
right?
And it can be overwhelming sometimes.
Yeah, and kind of in terms of like what's the actual learning mechanism, the one that's similar to these machine learning models is conditioning, in the sense that, like, if you're just talking about the most low level sort of like, learning mechanism, it's, I felt bad, something was bad about that, and then there's no kind of like high level thinking about what actually is there, and like, a more sophisticated meta-analysis of like, here's what happened, and drawing causality and that sort of thing.
Yeah, that's not usually what people are doing when they're venting. They're
exactly.
Just like, okay, all these things made me feel bad. Usually it's from one experience, and then they'll like be feeling all these emotions.
And then it reminds them of something else that made them feel bad.
They want to put the blame on something.
Right.
Which makes sense.
Yeah.
You want to see where is this coming from.
Right.
And so they're putting the blame, like, usually it's on like a specific person, like, oh my god, Mandy's just Mandy's just making me feel bad all the time.
Right.
It's It's Mandy's problem.
Right. And I think part of it is understanding it's like exactly what you were saying. It's like when you're venting, you're not doing that high level meta analysis, which makes it similar to how, which isn't using what partly distinguishes humans from these machine learning models, right? Is like you can actually think about what is the causality here. And I think that is really, really important because, your emotions are trying to alert you of, hey, I think generally the mechanism of negative emotions is something was different about your expectation, your model of the world than what just happened.
Yeah.
Right. And it's like, for example, the biggest sort of negative emotion you can feel is like grief, because your whole mental model of the world might be built upon, oh, but I have these important people in my life, right? And then if somebody dies, for example, then you have to like readjust your whole mental model of the world like without this person.
Gone.
Right. Yeah. And that's like extremely disorienting. And that's an extreme shift in terms of how you need to calibrate your mental model.
That's why some of like the most scary thing in your life can be like a loved one dies, and a loved one's just gone.
Exactly.
And it's like,
that requires extreme calibration, right? And so then you might have like little tiny things in terms of like negative emotions of like I'm slightly annoyed over here, or like I'm just like slightly frustrated about this thing, and it's kind of showing, hey,
I'm jealous about this thing, or I'm angry about this thing.
Yeah, and generally you want to know what's causing that disconnect, so then you can actually think, oh, how do I update my mental model so I don't get blindsided again, or whatever it may be.
Yeah.
Right? Because there's a reason why we have these emotions, and it's not so we can use all these other ways of how can I resolve the emotion without actually dealing with the problem. Here's the thing, though, is that being able to express your emotions is a big part of solving the problem and being able to identify what it is. Right. So it's not just like, oh, I shouldn't, sometimes people will be so problem oriented that then they won't actually be able to correctly identify what the problem was because they didn't first go through that, like being able to express themselves, right?
So your subconscious is what's causing all of these emotions. Mm-hmm. And your subconscious is like huge. It's picking up on so many things that your conscious mind won't actually, a lot of the time is not actually aware of.
Right.
So you'll be feeling this emotion, and you feel like you have to get it out. You have to like actually identify what's causing this.
Right.
Because you might be feeling the emotion, but you don't know how to express it.
Right.
And it's really really, really hard to express it. So I think venting in a sense is really helpful in the sense that you don't just want to be like try and look at it from like a conscious logical perspective without trying to actually get the emotions out. But
it kind of depends on like what does getting the emotions out mean, though, because if it's just like let me just say whatever I feel like saying based on these emotions right now, instead of like, how do I try to accurately communicate my emotional perspective, right? Because you want to think about what actually happened in my brain to cause these emotions, and how did that feel, and maybe how did that influence my actions, and how did, what was going on in the other person's head, and how did that influence their actions, right? That's like, that somebody could see you doing that, and maybe you're kind of still emotional while you're doing it, and that can seem like venting. But if it's with the goal of trying to have a very accurate account of your subjective experience, that's very different than also making broad assertions about the objective reality around you without really thinking and trying to make it constructive.
So I think that's what a lot of people can fall into when they're trying to when they're like venting, is because they'll have all these emotions, and then they'll start making like, oh, Mandy was trying to hurt my feelings, this thing happened because I don't know, just really broad assertions and assumptions about what's actually going on.
Instead of just, this is how I felt during this, and this is what I think about, what might have caused me to feel this way.
Yeah, and that can be like, it can be really
it's a skill to know how to rephrase that.
Yeah, but but it can also like, it's a skill that's necessary because it can be really, really damaging if you're in that highly emotionally charged state, and then you're making those assumptions,
right?
Because that can assert things in your mind that are completely not true, and you can lose a lot of relationships.
Yeah, especially because a lot of it is like the people around you. I think a lot of what can sometimes be damaging is that a big part of our culture is that we've kind of like prioritized people's subjective reality in a way that it doesn't, that seems like it, people are saying that it doesn't even need to be kind of checked with what is the reality that we can triangulate through different perspectives and more critical conversation. Because it's like, yeah, you feel a certain way, and that's true that you felt a certain way if you felt it, right? But then in terms of then drawing causality of, oh, it's because of this, like that's the part where it's like it's dangerous to say that with certainty I know this, right? Because that, as you said, it can assert that in your own mind, and then especially because oftentimes people around you will just validate that and say, that's what was happening. So, they suck so much. It's like, I think now we're getting a bit ahead of ourselves.
In some I think that's what can happen in some of these friend groups and in these cliques, especially that you see.
Right.
I don't know about cliques, because that can bring back to like, children, whereas adults can have these too, where they, I think what happens in some of this venting that can how some of this venting goes down is that people will start with the assumption,
right?
Like, hey, why are you upset? What's going on?
It's because right.
And so people will be like, they'll notice when someone's upset. Why are you upset? And then the person will be like, this person is bad, and this person has this problem. But that might not be what's going on at all, because people make mistakes, and there are misunderstandings. So one really simple way to actually keep that from happening is just to really try your best to just articulate what happened in the situation, and then say, I felt like this in this moment.
The thing about being able to try to communicate an accurate, reflection of what was going on in your subjective reality with the goal of what was missing from my mental model that caused me to feel this negative emotion, telling me that there was something unexpected here, right? Because whether it's somebody said something or something happened that you're upset about, right, there's a reason why you might have not seen it coming, right? And there's a part of that reality that you probably don't understand yet that caused that negative emotion, right? And then oftentimes people are not looking to see what is it that's missing from my understanding, because obviously you're feeling hurt and probably don't feel a lot of motivation to do that in the moment, right? And I think that that's part of the thing about it, though, is that you are going to feel better once you understand. And I think that's a big sort of, signal as to I'm actually growing my understanding and I'm actually approaching this in a constructive way, is you'll feel better once you have a better understanding of, oh, this person said something like this, probably maybe they're going through something else, or maybe they thought this thing about you and you were able to resolve a misunderstanding, right? Those things can happen if you're open to what is it that's missing from my understanding.
And you don't need to frame it as in like, I think I don't think it's helpful to frame it as, I messed up this way, or I wasn't seeing that, and that's like a problem with me. No, it's just what happened that I didn't expect. Right. What's the thing that caught me off guard.
Right.
And then that framing it like that is actually really helpful, because then you can narrow down on like, okay, what actually happened here and what gave me that signal, and then when you actually know that, then it's a lot easier to be like, okay, well, it wasn't a big deal,
right? Or
it might not be something with me, or it's just when you're looking at the very specific thing that caught you off guard that you didn't expect, you're putting it away from the people. You're not making assumptions. You're looking at what the objective reality.
Right. And that's part of, I think, is important, is that there's like, we say like there's objectivity to your subjective reality, in the sense that like, yes, if you had felt or experienced something, that is true, but then that's being able to be very careful about, drawing that causality and making those assumptions. Because I think that that's part of, what makes it really hard for people to try to build shared understanding. And like we talk about when it comes to all these relationships and stuff, is that the world today is so complicated. And so there is so much that isn't in our perception, right? There's so many things that are going to make us upset. And there's so many things that are like being presented to us that are like even like trying to get us to have these sorts of negative emotions and things.
Yeah.
And I think that because of that, you can get so confused that we don't even perceive what is the purpose of these emotions and how can we actually use that to our advantage, because it's like oftentimes it's like, oh, obviously you want to get rid of your negative emotions because they don't feel good, right? But it's like, if you don't know the utility of them and all you're trying to do is how do I get rid of these things that don't feel good, oftentimes you're going to blind yourself, and then oftentimes that just leads to more negative emotions in the long run.
Yeah,
right?
And then you also need to be very careful about this, because like you were saying, that's what a lot of people are trying to get you to feel, this emotion of like of blame.
Yeah.
And like that's how so many of these like of like news stories and like and like it's and people just spouting out their opinions,
right,
is because a lot of the time they're not even they're either they're taking a situation out of context, or they're not even referencing a situation at all,
right,
and they're just putting assumptions
right
on maybe a person or a situation, and it's really easy to just if you want to just believe that and be like, oh yeah, that person's like so stupid and they shouldn't have done that, and like and it feels satisfying, like I said, but it's not actually going to help you with your relationships. And it feels a lot better to actually see things from a perception of like, I understand this, and trying to understand people.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing, is that as you continue to understand more and your awareness grows, you're going to perceive more things, and that means you're probably going to perceive more things that you don't expect, which is why even as you learn and grow, you're still going to have negative emotions, right? Because now you're perceiving even more, which allows you to see even more things that might be unexpected, right? That's why it's like we never stop learning, right? And that also means we never stop experiencing negative emotions sometimes, but that's actually a really, really good thing. It means that we're actually able to continuously grow and continuously perceive more, so we can do more with ourselves and our lives to add value to others.